Good evening, everyone. My name is Blakeley, and I will be presenting on time use among Senegalese peanut farmers. This is some of the research we have been collecting with the Peanut Innovation Lab from the University of Georgia, Athens, and I will be presenting on some of our results and our next steps. So the general outline is going to start with a lit review to set up a background to better understand why this work is important and what we're doing. Then I will go through the ethnographic study, which actually collected the data that we're using, followed up by a general time use conceptual model that we've created in order to understand how people are allocating work. And then finally some special cases, which are exceptions to the conceptual model itself. And finally, our future research that's planned along with the rest of this research. To begin our lit review, I'm going to overview time use itself. So to begin with, time use is how time throughout the day is used on different activities. And time data collection is logistically challenging in developing countries. This is because a lot of the population is subliterate. So tools that are usually used, such as time diaries, are hard to implement itself. Time diaries are effectively writing down different tasks and activities throughout the day so that you have a complete view of the activities done. These time diaries are frequently deployed in developed countries, such as the United States, Canada, and European countries. So there's actually quite a lot of data for these countries itself, but the time data that we have in developing countries usually relies on recall, meaning an interviewer asks a participant what their activities were for potentially the previous day or the previous week or even at different times throughout the year. A lot of times this data is relatively incomplete, meaning that it's only deployed at one singular time instead of collecting time throughout the year to get a better look at what different activities might be done at different times of the year. And also is reliant on people's memories, which can be problematic in different ways. But from some of the time data that has been collected, there is some themes that have emerged. Time poverty, which is the inability to commit time to more tasks because time is already used for a lot of different things. So time poverty is exacerbate income poverty in poor households. Effectively what this means is that people who are already poor have time poverty, and this time poverty means that they can't commit more time to income generating activities. So the income poverty persists because there's no ability to generate wealth. Additionally, time spent in agricultural duties typically competes with other domestic duties, and more time spent in agriculture is usually an extension of the workday, displacing sleep, rest, or leisure. Now, women's and men's work can be pretty different. There's evidence that women experience more time poverty and also contaminated leisure. So contaminated leisure is effectively the inability to relax and needing to do other work, such as childcare or shelling peanuts at the same time as relaxing. This is partially due to the fact that men and women complete tasks differently. Men frequently complete tasks sequentially, meaning they'll go out into the field, they'll weed the crops, they'll water the crops, and then they're done. Whereas women complete tasks simultaneously. So women will maybe be cooking and cleaning and doing laundry at the same time as doing other tasks, potentially watching children or caring for sick family members. This results in women's workday being almost twice that of men's. And since women are so time constrained, it's important to take this into account when creating agricultural interventions. Agricultural interventions can sometimes increase time commitments and therefore may fail if they don't take into account that women already have time constraints and committing more time to agricultural interventions may be impossible. In practice, women are also frequently viewed as helpmates to men, meaning that men are completing tasks and women are helping them to complete these tasks, as opposed to women completing tasks on their own as their own economic actors. As for farming, women are frequently producing groundnuts on small plots of land, and the majority of these groundnuts are for household consumption itself. Women may not be investing in productive assets because they are first making sure that financial needs of the household are met before investing in other things. And then the amount of time women spend on farming is frequently constrained by other obligations, which are usually household obligations. However, women in Senegal are usually reliant on daughters or daughters-in-law to also work in order to complete tasks. Which brings us to the rapid ethnographic study. We completed the rapid ethnographic study in February 2020, where households in the Nioro-Kaolack region of Senegal were interviewed. This is a central region of Senegal just north of the Gambia. And 3 villages were visited with about 6 different ethnicities. Men and women of households were interviewed separately, with the ages ranging from young adult all the way up to old age. The ethnographic study itself was specifically trying to understand time use, fertility, and time constraints, and so the research was relatively targeted as opposed to being more open-ended. Which brings us to the conceptual framework that was developed. Now, this conceptual framework is effectively imagining what time use and time commitments are over age. So just to go over the model itself, we have young women and men, so children effectively, having very few time commitments and therefore more time available. And then as they get older and enter older childhood, they start taking on different tasks in the household or in the fields. And then once they enter puberty to young adulthood, they take on a lot more tasks and are effectively greatly increasing their time commitments and decreasing their free time over this age range. Once they enter middle age, and that's when they peak their time commitment. So they effectively have the most tasks and the least amount of free time during the middle age in order to make sure that the household survives. Then once they hit older ages, after their mid-40s effectively, their time commitments greatly decrease and they start taking on more managerial roles within their families. From this model, you can see that women are frequently more time-strapped than men, but at young adulthood to middle age, both men and women are time-strapped. Now, women's time use over age is effectively young girls start doing work, such as domestic tasks and sometimes agricultural work. But then as they enter puberty, they start taking on more of these domestic tasks. Their work greatly increases when they hit their teenage years and they start taking on a lot more responsibilities. In particular, when they get married and move in with their husband's family, they typically take on a lot of tasks because they are now being delegated work by their mother-in-law. And then once they have young children, their tasks increase, their time commitments increase even more because they're simultaneously watching young children as well as doing domestic tasks and agriculture. However, once the younger children start growing up, their children can start taking on tasks. Young girls in particular can start doing domestic work, therefore relieving the woman of some of her time commitments. And then once their children start marrying, their time commitments start decreasing. In particular, if their sons marry, they start bringing in daughters-in-law, and the daughters-in-law can start doing a lot of the domestic work. Once the woman has sufficient daughters-in-law, that means the woman's time use greatly decreases. Effectively, making the woman a manager and delegating a lot of domestic tasks to the daughters-in-law as opposed to doing them herself. Men's time use is somewhat similar. Boys start doing agricultural work. Typically they start doing more agricultural work closer to the age of 10. Once they hit puberty and young teenage years, they start doing manual labor and taking on a lot of agricultural work. And then once they enter young adulthood, men take on a lot of the agricultural work in the fields. And then these young men work frequently alongside their fathers until their fathers start managing the fields themselves. And so then these men, if they have sons, their sons start working the fields with them. Once these sons are sufficiently old enough to manage the fields, the men then retire and start taking on more managerial roles, such as delegating work within the fields. Now, when it comes to who's doing what in a household, the work is frequently dependent on who's present and what roles they have in the household. If there are many daughters-in-law, for example, the daughters-in-law will split laundry and cooking duties, and so they'll trade off on which days they're doing which duties. But it's important to note that women's work is frequently done with childcare itself. The childcare is often passive. Sometimes older children will take care of younger children, and sometimes elderly women will take care of younger children. But once again, all of the elderly women taking care of the younger children is frequently passive as well. Now, it's important to note that while this is the general concept of how people are working, there are special cases which are exceptions to this model. Women who do not have daughters-in-law to do domestic tasks frequently do these domestic tasks for longer, and their time use does not decrease with age. If there are no women in a household, this means that men will take on domestic tasks. And then it's important to note that women whose husbands have out-migrated during the rainy season will have to do more agricultural duties. For example, men who have migrated to another country and are sending back money to the family means that the women, in order to make sure that the household survives, will have to do agricultural duties in place of the men who are gone. Children, additionally, are time-strapped if they're juggling schooling and household chores. My colleague has a story of how she interviewed a girl in her mid-teens who was taking classes as well as doing household duties. And in order to accomplish everything, she frequently was up late into the night and only got about 6 hours of sleep overall. Finally, women who have family members who migrate seasonally might find that there's more work when family members are present. So for example, if a woman has a sibling or a son who travels to the big cities during the off-season and then migrates back during the rainy season in order to work the fields, they might find that this person who has migrated will wear jeans because that's more popular to wear in the cities. And that increases their workload because jeans are more difficult to wash than other types of clothing. And so on to what we're planning on doing next. We're going to deploy the baseline survey this month, and we're going to be using watches, activity monitoring watches to track time use. Effectively, what we plan on doing is putting watches on different farmers throughout the year in order to capture activities that they're doing at different times of the year, so capturing seasonality, where they will be recording their activities throughout the day, and it will also be capturing their effort through heart rate monitoring so that we can better understand what types of work has different types of effort assigned to it. We're also going to be on the lookout for shocks that might impact time use, such as fertility and childbirth, or to climate variability and weather shocks. And so I would like to acknowledge USAID, the Peanut Innovation Lab from University of Georgia, Athens, the University of California, Santa Barbara, and the Centre de Recherche pour le Développement Économique et Social for all the work that has been done on this project. And with that, I'm ending my presentation. So thank you, and does anybody have any questions?